So welcome everybody. I see 6 o'clock and we've got an awful lot of stuff to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Pleased to see a great turnout. I really appreciate you being here. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Josh Englehart. I am the superintendent of Painesville Schools in my first year in the assignment. So as you, I'm sure, are aware, every year the state puts out reports on school and district progress. This has been the case for many, many years, going back to the inception of No Child Left Behind. This year was different in that this is the first year that the state assigned overall letter grades to schools and districts. Okay? So this is the first year that happened. And the alarming thing, as I'm sure you're aware, is as a district we were assigned an F. And that makes it all that much more important that all stakeholders in Painesville City Schools fully understand what that means. So again, I'm pleased that you're here. If we are recording this to make it available for those who aren't able to be here tonight, so if you're watching by video, I'm pleased that you're accessing this information. I'm going to start with a snapshot and go from there. So the report card, the overall report card, is made up of 11 different inputs. And within each one of those inputs, there's a scale, a score scale, and your score on that scale within the input carries a particular weight toward the final grade. So it is pretty complicated, all right? However, it's my objective here to speak in absolutely as plain terms as I can in describing what each one of these means and what our performance and progress is within each one. So starting with the snapshot. So what I have displayed here are those 11 different inputs which contribute toward the final grade. And I have our performance, our district performance, both last year and the year previous. And the first thing I'll point out is what gets lost in a single designation of F is the fact that we actually improved in several of those inputs from the previous year, compared to the previous year. Now the exceptions are, and don't worry, I'm going to explain what each one of these things mean. The exceptions are performance index, where we performed similarly but a little bit lower. Value added, which we performed much lower than the previous year, and that's really what led us to the F overall designation. On paper, our score for improving at-risk K-3 readers is lower. However, as I'll explain, that's a result actually of a data entry error, and correcting that error means that we actually outperformed the previous year in that measure. Okay, but I'll speak to that. I'll speak to that more as we go. Now, even if you account for the fact that we improved in these inputs, the issue is that incremental improvement, small steps, just aren't sufficient for where we are. Okay? We don't have time for incremental improvement. That's the reality of our situation. So I want to say that right off the top as I explain where we are with these things. We as an organization understand that improvement, we don't have the luxury of implementing long-term improvement. We recognize that we have to turn it around right now, and there's urgency around that. So getting into the individual components. The first is performance index. Now, performance index is a different measure from the traditional just reporting of how many kids were proficient or not proficient. It's a single measure that seeks to account how kids performed all across the spectrum. And I recognize now that I see this up on the screen from your perspective, it's a little bit difficult to see. But what you see up there on the top left are all the different testing levels. So depending on how a child scores on an individual test, his or her performance is designated as either limited, basic, proficient, accelerated, advanced, or advanced plus. So those are the different possible scoring levels on each test for each student. The way the performance index works is they take all the tests and lump them all together. And they look at what percentage of those tests falls into each one of those categories. Then the percent for each performance level is multiplied by a weighted factor, and it yields points toward the total performance index, such that for every 1% of tests that are proficient, those are worth 1 point. For every 1% of tests that are limited, those are only worth 0.3 points. Okay, so the higher concentration of those higher performance levels, the higher the overall performance index score is. So that's what performance index is. So the bottom chart, the 3 bars there, the stacked bars, that's our performance index over the past 3 years. Now, what you'll see is over a 3-year period, which is the 3 years where the tests were similar because the state has changed the test significantly. But over the past 3 years, that's a similar test that we can compare. And what we see in terms of our performance trends is it's been pretty flat. It's been very similar over the course of the last 3 years. The difference this past year compared to the year previous is we had a slight increase in the percent of our tests that were proficient tests with a slight, I'm sorry, did I say increase? We had a slight decrease in the percentage of our tests that were designated as proficient, along with a slight increase in the percentage of our tests that were designated as limited. Now, that's a really bad pattern in terms of your overall performance index score, because for every 1% of tests that are swapped out, proficient for limited, that takes off 0.7 points of your overall performance index score. Okay, so that accounted for the difference from 1 year to the next. We are, if you look at the top right, those are the scale scores within that component required to achieve the next level of points toward your overall grade. And we missed that next level by just 0.7 points. So that equates to moving around 2% of our tests, just 2% of our tests, from just below proficient to proficient. So we're right there for that next step, even with having a flat performance over the past 3 years. Something else I will point out here is every untested test counts as 0 towards your performance index. So whenever we have students who are untested, that kills us. That really, really hurts the performance index. Last year we had 11 students who went untested. Now, that's not 11 tests because each kid takes multiple tests. So that's 35 tests that were counted as untested, which equates to at least a 0.3, at very least a 0.3 reduction in our performance index score. And when every 1/10 of a point counts, that makes a significant difference. Now, why are kids untested? I'll tell you, we, and the guidance department at every building can tell you, we track down kids wherever they are to get them tested, whatever it takes. But we still have kids that just disappear, that just stop attending school for a couple of weeks. They absolutely disappear off the grid. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that. And it does affect our performance index. So that's just something to keep in mind as you interpret that performance index score. The second input under the achievement category on the report card is indicators met. So to meet to get one of the tests under indicators met, you have to have overall, you have to have 80% or more of the students proficient on that particular test, 80% or greater. That's over 24 tests. There's also 4 other indicators that can be met other ways, which are end-of-course exams, a gifted indicator, and chronic absenteeism. So first, some context around indicators met. Across the state, 72% of all districts received an F in indicators met. 72% of all districts across the state. Districts of all different types in all different areas. Most districts across the state got an F in this area. It makes it difficult to see this as a real meaningful indicator in terms of steering us in any particular direction, because it's an indicator, it's a standard that nobody is meeting. And as I'll talk a little bit more about later, there's been a shift in the test. The state test used to be an indicator of minimum high school proficiency. That's what the test used to be. The tests are now tests of college readiness. That has a significant impact. So the state has kept that same performance level of 80% proficiency for the indicators, but it's measuring something very, very different, which is why you see most districts, and I mean everywhere, I'm talking about even our neighbors like Perry and Riverside and Mentor, receiving Fs in indicators met. We did, however, meet the indicator for end-of-course improvement. That is on retakes of the high school exams. So in order to meet that indicator, you have to have 25% or more of your kids improve whenever they retake the test, and we met that standard, and we actually outperformed similar districts on that particular indicator. So we expect improvement, but this is an indicator that's just out of reach for almost everybody in the state. One thing I will point out here, which is important for stakeholders to understand, one of the indicators is chronic absenteeism. Okay? The students are now, or districts are now held accountable for the percentage of their students who are chronically absent. In order to meet that indicator, you have to have 13% or lower chronic absenteeism. Okay, 13% or lower. Now, districts who are above that threshold can meet that indicator next year by reducing their rate. So we can meet this indicator next year by reducing our chronic absenteeism rate by about 1.1 percentage points. All right? But what I want to point out is how alarming that number is. All right? As a district, we have 21.9% of our students, more than 1 out of every 5 of our students across the district, who are chronically absent. And this is where we need help. This is where we need help. We employ a full-time person in the district who does nothing but attendance intervention. She has to spend a significant amount of time at court for kids that just don't come to school. And when it comes down to it, realistically, there's only so much that we can do to get a kid to school. We're just not able to go and knock on doors and get kids out of bed in the morning. So and you can't learn if you're not here. It just doesn't happen. There's no substitute for being here in class with your teacher. So this is, it's important, again, as stakeholders to understand, we need help with this. We really, really need help. So even though it's hard to get a lot of meaning from that overall indicator, or that overall input of indicators met, when we dig into our actual performance and performance trends on the individual tests, there is a lot to learn there. That's where the value is. And again, I apologize because I know that this is a little hard to see, but what I have represented up here are all of the tests. And I have each one coded in green, yellow, or red. All right? So what I have here is for all of the tests that we improved significantly compared to the year previous, those are coded green. So where you see green, that's where we've significantly improved on that particular test. Where you see red, that was a significant decrease for that particular test compared to the previous year. And then the yellow, everywhere where there's yellow, that's where we performed essentially the same compared to the previous year. But I did put pluses and minuses in those boxes. Where you see a yellow plus, that means that the score was very, very similar, but we were a little bit better than the previous year. And where you see a minus, the score was very similar, but we performed a little bit lower than the previous year. So that's what our profile looks like across that test, or across all those tests. So what you see here is there are some significant improvements that get lost in the overall grade. Okay? Notably, in third grade math, we had our 4th consecutive year of improvement. That's steady improvement year by year. In 4th grade reading, we had our 3rd consecutive year of improvement on that test. And then on Science 8, Algebra 1, Government, and English Language Arts 2, we had our 3rd consecutive year of improvement in those areas. So that's some pretty steady real growth across those areas over time. Now our problem is, in the areas of 4th grade math, 5th grade math, and 5th grade science, we took steps backwards, right? So for those all those little steps that we took forwards, those steps backwards were big enough that it pretty much wiped out the gains that we had. In Math 4, we had our 3rd consecutive year of decline. And in both Math 4 and Math 5, we had our 3rd consecutive year of decline. And in science, we're trying to figure out what happened there, because prior to last year, we had 3 years of steady improvement, and then we had a significant step backwards. Right? But again, there's a lot of improvement there, but it was wiped out by our areas of regression. A couple of important notes about some relationships with standardized test scores. And I point these out. Let me be very, very clear and very, very forceful on this point. I point these things out not in an effort to make excuses or explain away subpar results, but because it's important to understand in the context of talking about test scores. There is a almost perfect relationship between standardized test scores and the percentage of your students who are economically disadvantaged. On the graph on the left, that is a line plot of performance index versus percent of students who are economically disadvantaged. And this is on Ohio tests, so this isn't on some other measure. These are the tests that our kids take. And what you see there is, again, almost a perfect relationship, such that the districts with the lowest percentage of students with economically disadvantagement perform the highest on the tests, and the districts with the highest percentages of economically disadvantaged score the lowest on the test. And not only do you have those points, but every point and every increment in between is almost a perfect linear relationship. That's important to understand. The graph on the right shows for this past year, the median income of districts by grade designation. And what you'll see there is, again, the same relationship. Districts who were awarded an A had a median income of $67,660. Districts who were awarded an F have a median income of $26,363. And again, every point in between follows that same trend. I point this out because where we are, and a lot of us in our community aren't necessarily aware of this, our median income is under $26,000 a year. All right, that's at the poverty level for a family of 4. Those factors matter in terms of measuring the way that we measure the outcomes. And again, let me be perfectly clear. That's not excuse making. Okay, we expect to do better. Our task is to buck this trend. That's what we have to do. We have to change this. That's the task in front of us. We have to do something that few have managed to do, but that's our job. Okay, that's our task. Another thing for context that's important to understand in terms of standardized testing. These bars represent the state goals for performance index on math by subgroup. Okay, when we talk subgroups, we talk about outcomes of kids whether they're categorized as being white, multiracial, Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, black, those categories. What we know is, again, on our state tests, different groups of students perform very, very differently. Very, very differently. These are the state goals. And you'll see that by group, the state goals differ by as much as, what, 26%. Okay, those are the goals set by the state, because the state even acknowledges and recognizes that different groups of students perform very, very different on these tests. Now, here's what we know. Nobody differs in terms of ability by where they come from or their background. Nobody differs in terms of ability. We know that. But something else is going on with these tests. And there's a lot of reasons for a pattern like this. One of them is testing bias, but there's a lot going on there. And it's way beyond the scope of this presentation. But again, as a matter of context, I point this out. Because if you have a district that is made up of mostly the groups of kids for which this system works really well, then you got nothing to worry about. Okay, if your district is diverse, like ours, which is a great strength, then these things come into play. Okay, again, as a matter of context, just to understand the way that standardized measurement works. The next component on the report card is progress, and as I said at the top, this was our big problem this past year. This is what really, really hurt us in terms of our overall grade. So progress is determined by something called value-added measurement. Again, it's an extremely complicated formula that really nobody understands. All the numbers go into this magic box down at the state, and it spits out these numbers. The challenging thing about value-added is you're not competing against yourself. You know, when you think about progress, you think about growth. Intuitively, you'd think that that means, did we do better than we did last year? But that's not what it means. In value added, where our kids are compared against kids across the whole state. So it's kind of a moving target. It's very much a moving target. And these scores can vary wildly from year to year. For example, over our past 5 years, our trend of overall value-added score has gone F, F, B, C, F. And we really don't have a way of kind of monitoring this along the way. We don't know what it's going to look like until the report card comes out. But this is a snapshot of what our value-added was. And again, I'll explain what this whole mess means. So we have the tested grades and the major areas. So we've got 4 through 8 plus the high school end of course exams, and we have reading, math, and science. And then there's an overall score for across all grades and across all tests. So what you see here is anywhere where you see green, that means that our kids experienced more than expected growth. So you can think of that as, in those areas, our kids experienced more than a year's worth of growth in that area. Anywhere where you see orange or red, that means that our kids did not experience expected growth in that area. So what our profile looks like here is it's going to echo what we saw in our performance across the test in that last, going back a couple of slides ago. Our growth was very good in reading overall. We had strong growth in reading overall. And we had really strong growth in 7th and 8th grade overall. Those were areas of clear strength. But again, those steps forward were canceled out by the steps backward, in that we had particularly low growth in 4th grade last year and particularly low growth in math and science. Okay, so again, we have kind of a canceling out effect where we had our strengths, our weaknesses were such that it canceled out those strengths. I'm going to talk about programming once I get through the basic report card information. But this is a point where it's important to kind of understand the progression of our curricular and programmatic development. because it kind of explains what we see here to a certain extent. When you go back over the past 5-6 years, our curriculum development, our program development has basically, it breaks into 4 basic phases, okay? So at the start, we had a situation where we were lacking an aligned curriculum. Overall, we were kind of lacking an overall program of instruction aligned to standards. So we had to address that. And given the resources that we have, we decided that the best starting point was to invest in literacy. Because the thinking is, you need literacy skills for everything. So we have to build a really strong foundation of literacy. So what we did was we made the decision to pour all of our resources into developing our literacy program. And what we did was we established a solid foundation of a literacy framework, common expectations, the proper materials for our teachers to work with, well-stocked classrooms across the district. So we kind of put all of our eggs in that basket, admittedly. That's where we were, and that's the strategy that we took. But then we move into a third phase, which is new state standards. So now all of a sudden we have new state standards across all of our content to align all of our curriculum to. So that took a significant amount of time and energy and resources to accomplish that. And then that brings us into our 4th phase, which is really just now, and that is now we got to take all those eggs and put them in the math basket, because we designated everything to building literacy, and we're honestly, admittedly, just now really putting that same attention into building our math programming. So as we look at where we are here, we can kind of make sense of that because of those decisions that we made in terms of building our programming over the last several years. The next input into the report card is graduation rate. Something that's important to understand is on graduation rate on the report card, it's always a year behind. So these graduation rates are actually from 2016-2017. And the reason for that is all the report card information is processed before the final graduation numbers come out for that same year. So graduation is always a year behind. There are 2 pieces to this. There's the 4-year graduation rate and there's the 5-year graduation rate. Now, it's assumed that the 5-year graduation is generally going to be higher because whenever kids have that extra year to satisfy their requirements, then it's assumed that you're going to have more graduates. So that target is higher to meet that benchmark. However, the trend for us is that our five-year rate is typically actually lower than our 4-year rate. And the reason is, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is that by expanding the pool to include 5 years of graduation, it expands the pool of the kids who just disappear. Okay, so we have kids that don't graduate because they just disappear. They leave the school and we never see them again and we don't know where they went. So we actually, that 5-year rate, while the target is higher, our rate tends to be lower than our 4-year rate. So the good thing about graduation rate always being a year behind is this past year we experienced our highest graduation rate that I could find going back multiple decades. So that's in the bank. Okay? We have that credited towards our next report card, which is going to have a significant impact. But something that's important to understand is what gets lost, again, whenever you just see a big F, is where we've been and where we're going. These are our graduation rates over a 6-year period. And we have steadily climbed. When you go back to 2012-13, we were only graduating 60% of our kids. Okay, so 4 out of every 10 of our kids weren't making it across the finish line. And we have clawed and fought and scrapped our way up over 80%. Now, it still shows up as an F, but this is where we're going. This is what we've done, and this is where we're going. Now, we've accomplished this not by lowering our graduation standards, but by getting a lot better at tracking kids' progress along the way and providing them more high-quality credit recovery opportunities and supporting them to get to the finish line. So that's where we are, and that's where we're going. So we do have a lot to celebrate in terms of graduation rate. Do we want to be up to 100%? Absolutely. All right, but we're coming from 60%. We got to keep that trend line going. Now, one word of caution, as the state often does, there is a reasonable likelihood that the state is going to change the rules again on us and is going to remove some of the graduation pathways that were previously available. If that, this is kind of as a disclaimer, if that happens, then virtually every district across the state is going to see a significant decrease in the graduation rates. So we kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best and hope that the lawmakers do the right thing. But the good news is we have a good rate in the bank for next year's report card. So something that I alluded to that again is important to understand. As of the end of September, which is when I started putting this thing together, we already had 20 kids coded as dropouts for this year already. Okay, about a month and a half into the school year. And understand that these are kids who, again, just disappeared. They stopped coming to school and they just disappeared. So when you look at graduation rates, and we know that we as districts get compared with one another. Oftentimes when you look at our rate, and if you see our rate is a little bit lower, understand that it's not just a function of our kids failing to meet the requirements to graduate. We do have those kids. We still have kids who fail to meet the requirements. But we do have a lot of kids in each cohort who just disappeared. Okay? And that matters in terms of our rate. The next input in the report card is gap closing. As I mentioned earlier, the state recognizes that subgroups of students perform very, very differently on these tests. And so what the state does is it sets goals for each one of those subgroups, and then the expectation is that we close those gaps, each year from year to year. Again, my apologies. This is all of our gap closing data. So let me tell you what you have here. There are 4 areas in the gap closing component. All right, there's reading, math, graduation rate, and the progress of English language learners. All right. So in each one of those graphs, each colored bar represents a different subgroup. Okay. So the length of the bar shows you the performance of that particular group for our kids. You'll see out to the right of each one of those bars is a dot. Each one of those dots is the state goal for that particular group. All right? So anywhere where you see the bar touching the dot, that means that we already met that goal. We already achieved that goal set by the state. Anywhere where it's not touching, then there remains a gap. And that's the gap that we have to close. So in summary, again, there's good and there's bad in here. The good is on graduation rate, which is the top right graph. We've already met most of our goals already. So we've successfully closed those gaps. So we met 100% of the gap closing goal for graduation rate. The bottom graph, the big purple bar, that is for the progress of English language learners. Now, students for whom English is not their first language, they take a language test, a language proficiency test each year. And they fall into a language proficiency category based on their performance on that test. So what this component measures is how much are those kids progressing from year to year. And we met that goal. Okay. So 100% of the gap closing goal was met for those 2 areas. That's the good news. The bad news is, in reading, we did close some of the gap. We achieved some of the goal, but not enough. It was relatively very little. And then in math, and here's the common thread you're going to see, we didn't meet any of the gap closing goal for math. Okay. So that's an area that hurt us very badly once again. The next input is improving at-risk K through 3 readers. This is a component of the third grade reading guarantee, which you may be aware of. It's a state policy that says that if a student does not achieve proficiency by grade 3 in reading, that they are supposed to be retained. They're supposed to be held back. And the way that this measure works is every one of our students is either based on their test performance is designated as being on track or being off track. Okay, so every student has that designation. And what this measure determines is what percent of our kids moved from being off track to being on track. Okay, so that's what this measure is. Now again, I'll note this is another moving target because the level that is set as a C for the state each year is determined on the state average. So you can be in a situation where you could improve from one year to the next, but your grade could be worse than it was the year previous because it again, it's comparison across the state. So I mentioned the data entry error. I'll try to kind of put this in a nutshell. There are deductions. So let me back up a second. For every student who's designated as being off track, for every off track student, it's required that that student is put on a reading improvement and monitoring plan. It's called a RIMP, R-I-M-P. For every student who tests as being off track, who did not have a RIMP, who didn't have one of those reading plans, the state makes deductions on your score. Okay. What happened to us this past year is we didn't actually have kids who weren't on plans who were supposed to be, but whenever the data was input into the data management system, we had some kids that were coded wrong. So to the computer, it looked like we had kids that didn't have plans that actually did. So that drug our score down. That's what happened there. Again, if we hadn't have made those errors, our percentage of improvement would have been better than the previous year. But despite that, as I said, our score in this component still would have been a D, but even though it was better than the previous year we got a C. So that's just how the state does it. So we know what that error was, and we have multiple people looking at that data before it goes in. It's not going to happen again. This graph shows our kids. The blue is on track. The red is off track. Okay, it's year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, which equates to, well, it's actually K 1, 2, 3 is what that equates to. Year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And here's the pattern that you see here. And we see this in a lot of our own internal measures as well. We make tremendous growth from the first year to the second year to the third year. We steadily get kids on track at a very rapid pace. But then something that happens in reading instruction is you hit a point where you move from learning to decode words, from learning reading fluency, to the point where comprehension matters more. So understanding what you're actually reading. So we can have kids who decode words really well and read very fluently, but if they don't comprehend it, then that's the missing piece. It's whenever you move from year 3 to year 4 when that comprehension piece becomes a lot more important, and we see kids drop off. And one of the challenges that we have is when it comes to reading comprehension, your background experiences matter a lot because you have to have basic knowledge to attach concepts to in order to make sense of it. So if we have a lot of kids who have comparatively to their more affluent peers in other places, might have fewer experiences to attach to, it really makes that reading comprehension difficult. So that's a challenge that we have. It's a challenge that we've seen, and you know, it's something that we have to build more support around in terms of our program. Again, as a matter of context, something that I think is important for all of our stakeholders to understand. These are the year one on track versus off track rates in Lake County. So again, the blue is on track, the red is off track. So just so you have a concept of where we're starting from. It's our job to teach all of our kids everything that they need, all right? But in terms of the outcomes, the way they're measured, it does matter to a certain extent where you start off. We have peer districts in the county who have 75 up to 100% of their kids coming into kindergarten who are already reading. That matters, because what the report card does is it compares us against other districts. That's a contextual thing that's important to understand. Most of our kids come to us without any literacy skills. And so, and it's our job to build them up. It's our job to get them where they're supposed to be. I want to be clear about that. Don't get me wrong on that. But we start in a very different place. We start in a very, very different place. The final input on the report card is something called Prepared for Success. It's the percentage of kids who earn remediation-free scores on the ACT or SAT, earn an honors diploma, or earn an industry-recognized credential. So what our numbers are in I'll just tell you what's up there. So we had 17.2% of our kids who achieved those criteria. So that amounts to 64 kids who scored remediation free on the ACT or earned an honors diploma, with an additional 33 kids who met bonus criteria, which would be achieving an AP score of 3 or higher, or earning college credits through our CCP program. So that's where we are at 17.2%. But again, just to understand the concept or the context of this particular measure, this is another one of those measures that most districts in the state are falling well short of. Over 85% of all districts in the state received a D or an F in this area, and over half of all districts in the state received an F, while 1.5% of districts in the state received an A. So again, you know, it's our job to make that 17.2% grow significantly in a very quick period of time, but understand that this measure on the report card is something that nobody's hitting. These are our peers in Lake County who, you know, oftentimes we think that they're producing all these college-ready kids. But as you can see, everybody in the county has a D or an F with the exception of Kirkland. So it's a number we have to grow, but just understand that measure on the report card is a long ways away for just about everybody. When we dig into our own numbers, we look at the percentage of our kids who are earning a 3 or better on their AP exams. Again, we've had good growth over time. When you go back to 2014, we had 0. Okay, we're up to 21%. That's good growth. But the problem is we're still below average. Okay? We're still below average, and below average isn't good enough. So this is good growth, but we have to be better there as well. So that's the run-through of all of the inputs that are on the report card. And again, it can get pretty complicated, and I've done my best to try to put that in as plain speech as possible. So, knowing that we're not where we need to be, that our performance is not acceptable, now we turn our attention to, okay, so what are we doing about it? And I'll start with a quick rundown of some of the things that we've put in place, some of the big components of our comprehensive improvement plan. And I'll start, I already mentioned the comprehensive literacy framework. There was a time in the district not too long ago, where in truth a lot of our elementary literacy instruction was left to chance for to a certain degree. Your child might be in a classroom where there's a very rich classroom library with a lot of high interest books for that child to access, or they might be in a classroom where there's virtually no books. Your child might be in a classroom where the teacher is providing high quality, small group guided reading instruction 2 or 3 times a week, or your child might be in a classroom where that teacher never does guided reading instruction. We've changed that. We have truly a comprehensive literacy framework with common expectations for instruction across every elementary reading classroom that is supported with materials, supported with professional development, and coached heavily. We've invested over the course of a 3-year period in bringing external coaches into the district to work with all of our reading teachers to build up those skills. We've invested heavily in providing truly high quality classroom libraries for kids to work from. Ms. Camper, how many books have we brought in? 10,000?
Easily.
Yeah. So all of our kids' classrooms, every one of our kids in the classroom where they receive reading instruction has a lot of access to books that interest them, to engage them in reading. We've also invested in book rooms in every one of the elementary building, well, even the middle school building too, so that teachers have a full room of books organized into groups that they can use to support their teaching instruction. So we're working to give the teachers the tools that they need to do it right. So that's established. We have implemented a system of standards-based instruction and reporting. For those of you who have students in grades K through 8, this means that the report card looks a little bit different. Okay, so instead of, for a given subject area, just seeing A, B, C, D, or F, you see individual standards, the individual skills or pieces of knowledge that the students are expected to know for that quarter, which correspond with the things they're actually going to be tested on these tests that we're held accountable for. And their proficiency is indicated for each one of those. Now, that is really important in providing our families with the right kind of information to really get a sense of how their child is doing. But it has a significant impact on instruction too, because in a standards-based framework, teachers have to organize their instruction around those standards. So that means that if there's an activity that somebody really likes, but it doesn't go with the standard that's supposed to be teaching, then it doesn't belong. And whenever you have to report how a child is doing, it has to be driven by those standards. So we're much more able to support teachers in hitting the standards that they're supposed to be hitting. And we're much able to support them. So we build full curriculum maps for the teachers where we help them sequence those standards, and we're able to give them resources to properly teach those standards, as well as high quality assessments to measure how they're doing. Another thing we've implemented is intervention and enrichment time. This is a block of time each day where we are able to provide both intervention and enrichment. There was a time in the past where we do have a lot of kids who receive some kind of extra service, whether it be title reading service, whether it be service for their individualized education plan, whether it be service for our English language learners, whether it be gifted services. We have a lot of kids who get what's traditionally called pull-out services because kids get pulled out of class for it. The problem with that model is, what are we pulling kids out of? We're pulling kids out of core instruction. So we pull kids out for these services, but that instruction on these standards for which we're tested is still going on. So we lose. So what we've been able to do is we've implemented this intervention enrichment time. That's when those services happen, so it's not interfering with core instruction. And for the kids who aren't receiving those specialized services, we have the opportunity to do additional intervention if they're still lagging behind, or enrichment, if they're ahead. So it gives us the opportunity to do that without sacrificing core instructional time. We have a lot of professional development programming going on. As you're aware, our teachers, we have late starts on Tuesday. Teachers are involved in professional development every Tuesday. So it's weekly professional development for our teachers. We also have a few designated professional development days throughout the year. We also offer a lot of after-school sessions for our teachers who are able to attend. And it's a professional development program. So the professional development that's being offered is truly built around the comprehensive plan. It's purpose-driven based on the needs that we have. And as you might guess, it's really, really heavy on math right now. We have instituted a district instructional framework. That is a definition of quality instruction for every classroom in the district, regardless of grade level or subject area. They're core expected instructional practices in every classroom. They're research-based, and they're driven by what our kids need. We've implemented Harvey Academy. Harvey Academy is essentially a school within a school located here at Harvey. It is a very selective credit recovery program. It is built for those kids for whom the traditional school day or school setting doesn't work for them. We're talking about kids who have to make the choice between working and supporting their family or going to school. We're able to provide an avenue where we can work with those kids to get credits towards graduation. Again, it's a selective program, but it's really, really important in us getting kids on track. And then the last thing listed there, our Family Resource Center. If you're not aware of the Family Resource Center that we operate within the district, it's currently located at Elm Street Elementary. It's a structure built to support the basic needs of families. So some of the things that we do through the Family Resource Center is we provide food, we provide clothing, we provide employment assistance, we provide ESL programs, we provide parent support programs, we coordinate medical services through there. So it's a structure that's built knowing that a lot of our kids need some basic needs met before we can even move on to learning. So those are efforts that we've made there. And again, these are just a handful of some of the major structures that we put in place through our continuous improvement program. But those things were already in place, and we got the results that we got. So now we got to take the step and say, so what now? Because it's not good enough. You got to do something more. You got to do something different. So here are the things that we have going on now. And our current action steps basically break into programming and support. So first on the programming side. And again, you're going to see it's very, very heavy in math because math is our area of need. We've implemented a math program in grades K through 5. It's called Eureka. This is significant because this is a comprehensive program that's now aligned to the standards. We started back in 16-17 with kindergarten and grade 1. We rolled it up to include K through 5 last year with focused support for grade 2 and 3 in particular last year. And then this year, it continues across all those grade levels, but now we really focus our support in grades 4 and 5, which is where we've seen our biggest steps backwards in terms of our measured test scores. We're still continuing with heavy support in grade 2 around number sense. That's a foundational skill that we have to have our kids get by second grade to move on with the curriculum. And that, for all of our grade 2 math teachers, that's what's happening every Tuesday morning. They're getting direct support around those skills every Tuesday morning throughout the entire year. Now this program is significant, again, not only because it's aligned to the standards, but also it really does seek to build that strong number sense, which we know is a foundational basic skill that a lot of our kids don't have a good handle on when they come into school. So we know that we have to really target that with our program. We've implemented a math program in grades 6 through 8. It's called Envision Math. Now prior to 2017, before we piloted this, we really didn't have a formal math program in the middle school. And so that's in place now and it's being supported. And we'll be adopting a high school math series moving forward. So 1920, we will have a formal program that we're certain is aligned to the standards. Some other things moving forward, we're moving to a departmentalized model in grade 3. Now what that means is that the traditional elementary setup is usually the kids are with one teacher all day long. And that teacher is tasked with being an expert on everything. With the depth of the curriculum now, and with our needs being what they are, we can't expect every one of our teachers to have that depth of expertise in every single area. So we're moving to a departmentalized model. What that looks like in grade 3 is instead of a child having one teacher for the entire day, he or she will have 2 teachers. So one of those teachers will be a reading and social studies teacher most likely, while the other is a science and math teacher. So that allows us to truly develop expertise in a reduced number of areas instead of trying to have that deep expertise across everything. Because it used to be the curriculum that is expected of 3rd graders now used to be like 6th grade curriculum. And it's been pushed down and down and down, and we just can't build the skill set that we need with our teachers when we expect them to do everything. Something that we've uncovered over time is we have to make sure that we're enforcing the instructional minutes that we designate for math and science. What happens in the elementary day is you designate certain times for certain subjects. As I said, we put all of our eggs in the literacy basket for the last several years. And we've really pushed and supported that very heavily. What can happen if you're not careful is some of that literacy instruction time starts bleeding into the other minutes of the day. And it's possible that you could be shortchanging some of that time. And what we know is, I mean, every instructional minute is precious. Every minute is golden. But when we see the struggles that we're having with math, we got to make sure we're maximizing that time and getting it right. And we've also, on the science side, we've implemented district-wide science labs, district-driven, district-supported science labs. Lab learning in science is a lot different than textbook learning in science. It's an important component. We're able to support that as a district and give teachers what they need to be able to do it right. So that's a district-driven thing, and so now we're able to provide our kids with a lot more of an authentic learning experience for science. On the support side, something I already alluded to is we have a significant increase in professional development for 4th and 5th grade math teachers. We do have we're fortunate to have a curriculum coordinator who's able to be a specialist in math. And basically we have changed all the work that she's doing throughout this entire year to be able to really work mostly with those teachers to make sure that they're supported. We are increasing the math support that we offer during that intervention and enrichment time. Again, I'll go back to with our heavy literacy focus, a lot of the intervention and enrichment time was used for literacy intervention and literacy instruction. Now, we still have kids who are going to need that. We're still going to provide it. But what we know now is we need to squeeze out some more instructional minutes in math, and we can recover some of them there. These next 2 points are things that we don't like a whole lot, but we feel like we're in a position with the accountability system being what it is and with the stakes being what they are, that we have to, our hand is forced to do some of these things. And that's a test prep focus. Now, we absolutely are not going to turn into test prep factories. I will go down with the ship on that point. But we got to do a little bit. We got to find ways to work it in. So some of the things we're doing, we're working with staff to help them with making their regular instruction and their regular assessment look and sound a little bit more like the AIR assessments so that they're, in theory, a little more prepared for those as far as the structure of them. And we're also using some adaptive software at the high school level for preparation for the end of course exams. So we have, wherever we can free up some minutes throughout the year, we are going to put put kids on these adaptive modules, so again, they're more familiar with what the test looks like and increase the likelihood of them being successful. Another adaptive software program that we've invested in is something called iReady. It is a gap closing, personalized program for both math and reading. So we're implementing that in a couple of ways. In the middle school, we're using this a lot during their intervention enrichment time. So the way that it works is a student takes a diagnostic assessment. The program determines where they are in terms of their skill within a particular standard, and then it provides them with exercises in order to improve in that area. For all of our middle school kids, the kids who take that diagnostic and we find that they're ahead of where they need to be for that point of the year, we've carved out a way to be able to give them some enrichment in science, and those who are behind will engage in the activities to close those gaps. And at the elementary time, we are building some of this into the library time for the kids. Again, it's not something that we like. It's not something that we like, but we feel we're in a position where we have to find time. We have to be creative and find ways to get kids work on this. Now, please understand, this doesn't mean that the kids don't have library anymore. Okay? They still have library. We still do read alouds. They still get to peruse books and choose out books that interest them. But we are going to take a bit of that time each time when the kids are in there, and we're going to give them some math exercises through the program. We're also currently working, and our November Professional Development Day is going to be a big one for this. We have pulled together all of the state assessment data, and we're getting it in our teachers' hands so that they can really study it and go through it. Now, this is information that previously the state didn't give us. So this is the first time that the state has actually given us how our kids performed within each strand down to the depth of the particular questions that they asked. That's really, really important information for a teacher. So what our teachers are going to be doing, they are the experts. So they're going to be getting into those data. Some of them have already started, very much started this, and will probably result in some curricular changes. We might find that there are particular areas that we struggled on where we shift that curriculum to a different point to make sure that we hit it to a greater depth prior to the tests. They're going to see that there are some areas that require greater or lesser focus. That's a really, really important exercise when we get down to improving our measures. Now, heading into next year, again, because we don't have the luxury of sustained improvement over time, and we're in a position where we have to turn things around significantly quickly. As we head into next year, there's going to be a lot of possibilities on the table as far as what we need to do differently. And what I mean by that is we're going to have to seriously consider potentially significant changes in the structure of the school day. We may have to consider potentially significant changes in how we staff. Those are things that really weren't available as options to us this year. So we're doing our best to get all these supports in place this year to take those steps forward. And then next year we might have to make some significant changes. It's just a reality. But where we are now is we fully acknowledge the challenges that we have. But at the same time, we fully accept responsibility for our outcomes. We're fully responsible for the outcomes on these measures. And you know, the F, when you look at an F, I want everybody to understand that F is not a function of our people not caring enough. It's not a function of our people not working hard enough. Something I've said many times, and I'll say it many many more times, is in my career, I've had the opportunity to work across many different schools, different districts, interact with many, many different teachers, both in my different roles in different districts, but also as a school improvement consultant for the Ohio Department of Education. I worked with schools from Lake County all the way over to Ashtabula County, all the way down into Mahoning and Trumbull County. And here's what I'll say. Our teachers are the most committed and most talented people that I've been associated with. Okay? Absolutely, hands down. So our challenges in receiving the measures that we want to see is not a matter of how much we care or how hard we try or how talented we are. Our task, again, as I said it, we have to find a way to disrupt some patterns that are very well established, and it's on us, and we got to figure it out. We have to be maximally efficient with every single minute that we have in instruction. We have to, with every lesson that we deliver every day, we got to knock it out of the park. Now that's a high standard, but again, it's our reality, and we're going to do it. Our people are up for it. I make no bones about it when I talk with our teachers. This is what they signed up for. This is what they want to do. But we got to be perfect. We got to be perfect every day to get there, and that's the task that's ahead of us. And you know, I'll close this part by just offering from my perspective. From my perspective as the person, the one person who is ultimately responsible for all this, I could not be more committed to this task. All right, my kid, this is my kid's school. I've had kids, at least one kid, in our schools for the last 11 years. All right, this is my community. I've lived here for 20 years. All right, so I'm fully invested, not to mention I'm going to lose my job if we don't. But I want you to know, it's not lost on us. It's not lost within our organization of how urgent this situation is. It's not lost on us. We take it very, very seriously. We're confident that we have some things in place here to do a lot better than we did last year. And then we got to take it from there. And like I said, that may involve some larger scale changes, but this is our next step here. So with that, I know that's a lot of listening to me talk. I appreciate it, but what questions can we address?
What exactly defines chronic absenteeism?
Yeah, so there's a few different benchmarks. It's do you know this offhand? Because I'm probably going to get it wrong, but it's like 5 consecutive days, or it's
based on also hours.
Well, yeah.
With
right.
truancy. So even coming late consistently can establish a pattern.
Yeah, that's right. But it's I think that it's 5 consecutive days, or it's a certain number of days within a month, or hours, excuse me, or a certain number of hours cumulative throughout the year. Any one of those can qualify as chronic absence. This is called wait time in the classroom. Yes, sir.
When you say chronic absences, what does the school district do about that? I heard her say that we have truant officers and we try to go to court. We try to find out where or why.
Yeah,
Is
so
there any tactics that you succeed at? I mean, get them back?
So the program is, there's obviously a system of notification. So we send letters out at those different benchmarks. And at a certain point, and I apologize, I can't define exactly what that point is, we develop an intervention plan. And we assemble an intervention team, which includes the parent, which includes people at the school, includes the student. How successful is it? A little bit. It's a little bit successful. We do a lot of knocking on doors to find kids. It's something that we haven't, honestly, we haven't gotten our arms all the way around just yet. We're still trying to figure that out.
One addition to that question, when you say a dropout disappears, that means he legally drops out of school and goes away? Or does that mean he just stops coming and you don't know where he went?
Yeah, we have a lot of kids that just stop coming, we don't know where they are. Now,
You don't know if they went to Riverside, you don't know if they went to Madison, you don't know if they just moved out of the country.
Right, because the only way that we know that is whenever we get enrollment documents from a receiving school district. Sometimes receiving school districts just don't follow through, and we don't know. But yeah, once they leave without us knowing anything about their circumstances, we lose some kids.
But that shouldn't count against us if they've just disappeared.
I would agree with you.
But it does.
But it does, yeah.
Yes.
But it does.
Dr. Engelhardt, when you talked about the 4-year versus 5-year graduation rate, there are students that complete all their coursework, but they don't pass the end of course exam, so they can't walk across the stage.
That's correct.
And some of those kids will come back the following year just to take those end of course exams again. So they could eventually be included in the 5-year graduation rate?
Yeah, those kids would be in the 5-year.
But the ones that we never see again are counted against us.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll say, we have, it probably is the greatest thing that we do at a board meeting, which isn't a high bar. In terms of, I don't mean in terms of work, I mean in terms of feel-good stuff, is when we recognize those kids who persevere and stick with it and meet those requirements in the 5th year. We do have several kids who meet that, and those are some of our proudest moments. But again, our 5-year rate still tends to be lower than our 4-year rate.
So, Dr. Engelhardt, when do you expect all these different assessment tools to change? When do you expect the state to say, oh,
Just kidding.
yeah,
We're
right, oh, we want to change these things,
Yeah.
and everything that you've done so far has been wonderful, but we don't really care about that anymore.
Well, I haven't heard any talk about any changes in the assessment. So they got beat up pretty bad for the last 2 changes. So I think that they're going to, I would guess that they're going to stay the course. So I haven't heard anything about that.
Obviously, they haven't been beat up quite enough.
Well, but again, the challenge is they're as I mentioned, the assessment is assessment, and there's value in it. But what we're assessing is college readiness, and not necessarily everybody is
No,
college ready.
absolutely not.
We don't necessarily expect everybody to be college ready. We expect them to be college or career or military or some productive path, whatever that next step is. It's not necessarily college readiness. So the issue is, so if you're going to assess for college readiness, then call it what it is.
Right.
And let's make sure that we're giving our kids these other opportunities and other pathways to be successful.
Do they realize that many colleges now don't require SAT and ACT scores?
I can't answer
Just
that.
asking because.
Can I get behind you, Mr.
When we talk about the state, is it the state school board that's setting this up? Who in the state is doing this?
Yeah, so these things all come from the legislature. And so we do kick ODE around a lot because we get frustrated. But the truth is, ODE is just the vehicle that has to carry out these laws that get passed. So I would argue that they do make a lot of bad decisions still, but oftentimes they're tasked with, they're just given a law and say, okay, make this work. Build things around this to make it work. And sometimes that takes a lot of trial and error, but the thing is through that course of trial and error, we're messing with our kids. And that's the frustrating thing. And everything is well-meaning, but when you're that far removed from the realities of the classroom, a lot gets lost in translation, and that's the frustration that we have.
One of the things to note, over the last 10 years or so, a fair amount of power has been stripped from the State Board of Education and taken over by the legislature in large response to a lot of where the state board was going with regarding our state standards and all of that. So the legislature kind of revolted and pulled some power away. But I wanted to ask a question about something you touched on, which was assessments may change a little bit. Now, right now, last year they created a bunch of kind of emergency alternative paths to graduation because the standards kicked in a next level and most of the kids in the state weren't going to make it, or at least a huge block. Currently, that is gone. You know, we don't have those options now. They're talking about maybe keeping those those alternative pathways. And I'm just wondering if you had any updates or could explain that a little more.
So in order for that to happen, it needs to be picked up during the lame duck session and for action to happen on it. Now, in the last week, I've heard that that's likely to at least be picked back up. So it gives us a little bit of hope, but it's anybody's guess. It really is. Yeah. Get you in.
My question was, so we talked a lot about the younger kids, and you spoke about the high school kids with their, SAT, ACT scores, and helping to increase that. Is there a plan on how to help them, or to take the AP test and get the 3? And what are there not, are there more kids taking AT that aren't, taking the exam?
Yes. So a starting point for AP in particular is, and we've started this a little bit, we need to do a lot more. We really need to support our teachers first. We, to this point, really haven't provided the kind of support that our teachers need in order to do AP. Because what we find is, when you look at the content, you have to get real creative about how to get all that content in. And without a lot of support and without seeing what it looks like other places and things like that, that puts us at a big disadvantage. So we've done that. We've sent teachers to AP workshops. We're sending them to other places for them to see what it looks like. And what I've seen now, having a kid in AP, we're doing things like, she had to do a lot of work over the summer to be prepared for the class. Well, previously we didn't really necessarily kind of know how to build that in order to get all that content in. So that's an example. So we have some decisions to make in terms of AP versus College Credit Plus, because the College Credit Plus program it allows our kids, mostly juniors and seniors, to be able to attend college classes. Most of our kids are at Lake Erie or Lakeland and actually start earning credits. So kids choose, do I want to take College Credit Plus and get those credits directly, or do I want to take AP, which might get me college credit, but it's just a different pathway. So we have these two options for kids, and we're kind of at a crossroads where we have to decide really what we're going to invest in and build. Because where we are now, it's difficult for us to fill a lot of sections of AP. We don't have the population of kids to fill all those sections. So we need to decide, are we going to push for building more AP classes, or are we going to capitalize on the CCP side of things, which I personally like that idea if we can get more CCP courses offered on campus, because I still think kids still need to have a high school experience. Whenever we send them out for the CCP, we're not able to monitor how they're doing. We have kids that have failed classes and we weren't able to do anything to intervene because it's happening out there. So the short answer is, we're at a point where we do have to choose how we invest, and that's what we're considering.
So I have probably multiple questions,
Okay.
but we'll start with the, I have a junior right now who's in AP and honors classes, probably a 3.7 to 3.8 grade point average. he literally said to us the other night, as he's reading AP homework, I don't feel like I'm ready for college. Maybe I'm not just ready for it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that if he had to write a 5 or 6 page essay, I don't know that he could do it.
Okay.
You know, it might be because he's not getting some of that in school. Now, I'm not a fan for every night 5-page essays,
Yeah.
but at the same time, what is the high school doing to truly prepare these kids who are in these AP classes for college level workloads? Because he wants to go into maybe engineering, which was going to require college, but now he's at a crossroads where he's going, can I do this?
Okay.
And so that's a question I have. And to follow that with the CCP is it true that if kids take that course and they fail that class, they have to pay for that course, correct?
So what my understanding is, because we're a low-income district, we can't charge kids.
Okay.
We can't charge.
So that
kids.
answers my question.
Okay,
Because
so
I was going to
that-
say, what encourages them to take that if they're afraid they may not pass it? You know, families, you might have parents saying, no, you can't take that because
Yeah,
we
that's
can't
good.
pay for it, you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, and that's a challenge. I mean, and it's you're right. You don't necessarily have skin in the game.
sure.
But to speak to the writing part specifically, we have in fact, and this is where, you know, my understanding or my vision of our programming is bumping up against your real experience here. In that we as a district have invested heavily in writing instruction in a really comprehensive way. And we're going back, what, 5 years? Where we did significant amount of training for our teachers in helping kids structure different kinds of writing. And then we required writing across the curriculum. So the expectation was that kids were writing everywhere, you know, in one way or another. On a regular basis. So writing is one of those things, the only way you get better at it is by doing it.
Sure.
And so the intent of our programming has been very much, we want kids writing all the time. And we do our own internal assessments of kids writing to inform kind of the impact of our programming. But what I'm hearing is that hasn't been your experience.
Well,
So
sure, and that's what, you know, concerns us, just because he gets to that next level and pursues that dream, and then what happens when he goes, oh my gosh, like I'm just not ready for this. Now, I understand you're working with different dynamics and economic, you know, diversity here too, so it's like, you know, I get both sides of that, but I want to see my own child succeed, and I'd like to see him not give up on pursuing something he probably will be very well at, because he's afraid that, or nervous about going to a higher level of education and not succeeding there, which then could result in, if he doesn't succeed, maybe he doesn't get that job because they look at, okay, you weren't successful on this writing aspect or this classwork, you know what I'm saying? So I do truly understand where the district's at, and I'm just trying to understand, like, how do we get him there, and are there resources for him, you know, to do that?
So, very, very valid. Like I said, there's a disconnect here between what my expectations are and what your experience
Sure,
is.
sure.
So we gotta, I think that we probably need to connect.
And we're not angry about that, so.
Yeah. Well, but you do get to that point where all of a sudden your kid is on the threshold of that next step, and you ask those questions: is he or she going to be able to do those things that they need to do?
Sure.
Dr. Engelhardt, I work for a college right next door, and I just want to assure you that just about every college or university has a writing center, because many freshmen come in and they just aren't quite sure the expectations of papers, and they do have tutors available to help them, you know, get kind of on track, and so he shouldn't worry about that. He should pursue his dreams, that the college or university he chooses does not want him to fail either.
Sure, sure.
And that,
But understand, I mean, it is our goal that
Right,
our kids
right.
leave with those tools and
Sure.
don't have to access the
But,
extra support.
but the colleges also have those just to kind of reinforce what they learn in high school.
Colleges are coming under the same pressure that our public schools are.
Oh.
I mean, they're getting a lot of attention and wanting to make sure that their students are succeeding and having the skills. So I mean, they're doing immense. I mean, compared to when I went to college, and you know, I've got 2 kids in college right now. I'll have my 3rd next year, and visiting the schools and looking at all the intervention programs and study aids and tutoring groups and study workshops. And I mean, at Cincinnati, they've got, for all the major classes, they've got study groups, TA groups, all that, all set to basically repeat everything that was done in the class that day, later that day, for the sake, you know, if the students want to go. You can get individualized tutoring. I mean, there's a lot of support out there. You know, obviously at the college level, the kids have to have the motivation to pursue it, but it's there, and you know, so it's they're facing the same things that we are.
I just obviously looking around this room, there's a very small amount of people compared to the kids that we have in the district, which is one of the frustrating things that I run into. You know, I work with the high school kids a lot, and you look around and, you know, we've got 170 kids in the marching band. We had 30 show up for parents' night. And it's just a reality of who we are. We have a lot of people that are working 2 jobs. We have a lot of parents that are, you know, they have other kids. They can't make it out to everything, and understand that. But as a community, you know, I see what we've got on the board. We've got a lot of great things in place while they're here at school or during the school day, but what do we do about it? Like, what do the parents do? What do other people in the community want to help with this and make a difference? Tutoring programs we can do. I know it's tough to get people to the school sometimes, stuff like that, but as a community, we've got a lot of people that I think want to help with this. What do we do now?
Yeah, so that is a big challenge. And let me just say, our families love their kids. Our families support our kids. Our families care very deeply about their kids' education. But not all of our families can be as available as they want to be. So that's, I mean, it is a challenge. For those who want to help, we do have a lot of people who help. We've got a lot of people who help. And traditionally, schools aren't very good at accepting help. It's just not set up well for it. But we, over the course of the last few years, have really built, I think, a strong infrastructure for plugging in people to work with kids. Now, this is largely during the school day, but I've had multiple people call me, and I was able to, well, to give their name to Mrs. Camper. and she gets them in there. And we provide even people who are, you know, might be a little apprehensive about getting back in the classroom after spell. We do professional development sessions for tutors where we kind of show them how we teach things, and we get very confident, very dedicated volunteers. So I would say to anybody, even if you don't know what that means, hey, I want to help, give me a call. We'll figure it out. Now, I would like to be able to provide more things outside of school. We do. It's very, very important that we get kids connected, and something that you know, it is a relative strength of us. We do have a lot of kids, when I think in terms of the high school, we do have a lot of kids that are connected to something. I mean, a quarter of our school's in marching band. So, you know, so there are a lot of opportunities, but we know how important that connection is. I mean, it's just critically important to success, however you measure it. The kids are connected with something. And so that's another. We need to be creative. We need to create things that kids care about, which as adults we aren't very good at that sometimes. But I'd love to figure out some things that can be done outside of school as well. So anybody who wants to help or have that conversation, give me a call and we'll figure things out, because we've been pretty successful at that so far.